Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started here. And as people are slowly entering into our Zoom reading, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time out on a Monday afternoon to come and listen to some prose and poetry. I'm excited to have two wonderful writers and poets joining us today, Lynn Melnick and January Gill O'Neill, who will be reading from their recent work and chatting to us about the process of writing in different ways. So I'll begin with a small introduction of the writers, and then we'll have a conversation about their process and their newest projects. Then each of them will read for about 10 minutes or so. And then we'll have a more traditional audience Q&A. So that's where you guys come in. If you have questions during the reading, you don't have to hesitate or wait till the end. You can just go ahead and throw them into the chat, or we have a Q&A Dropbox as well. I also wanted to mention that we have a chat that's open for everybody. And we've had some pretty fun, lively discussions via the chat, where people will comment on certain moments or lines, or have some thoughts about the reading while it is going on, which is something you don't usually get in a traditional face-to-face reading. So it's kind of fun. So the more interactive we can make it, the more interesting and engaging it can be. So I'll begin by introducing our writers, and I'll start off with Lynn Melnick, who is the author of the memoir, I've Had to Think Up a Way to Survive, on Trauma, Persistence, and Dolly Parton from the University of Texas Press. She is also the author of 3 poetry collections, Refusenik, Landscape with Sex and Violence, and If I Should Say, I Have Hope, all with Yes Yes Books, and the co-editor of Please Excuse This Poem, 100 Poets for the Next Generation. Her work has appeared in American Poetry Review, LA Review of Books, the New Republic, the New Yorker, the Paris Review, Poetry and Public Space, and the anthology Not That Bad, Dispatches from Rape Culture, edited by Roxane Gay. She currently teaches poetry at Columbia University, Princeton University, and the 92nd Street Y. Born in Indianapolis, she grew up in Los Angeles and currently lives in Brooklyn. She will be joined by January Gill O'Neill, who is an associate professor at Salem State University and the author of Rewilding, Misery Islands, and Underlife. Her poems and articles have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day series, American Poetry Review, Green Mountains Review of Poetry, and Sierra Magazine, among others. The recipient of fellowships from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, Cave Canem, and the Barbara Deming Memorial Fund. Recently, O'Neill was the John and Renee Grisham Writer-in-Residence at the University of Mississippi. O'Neill is one of 5 judges for the 2022 National Book Award in Poetry, and she lives with her 2 children in Beverly, Massachusetts. So I just wanted to say thank you for joining us, and we're so glad to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Maybe we can begin talking about your latest projects. Maybe we'll start off with Lynn and thinking about your recent memoir, I've Had to Think of a Way to Survive. Can you tell me maybe a little bit about that project and how it came together, and what inspired you to kind of combine your own personal experiences with the music of Dolly Parton?
Well, I've always loved Dolly Parton, so any opportunity to spend a couple of years thinking about her it was a good career decision. It actually came about at the end of 2018. I had been promoting very heavily a book called Landscape with Sex and Violence. I was at your school reading from that book. And I was just sort of exhausted. It's a book a lot about my own trauma and about rape culture, and I was just tired. And I wanted to write about something that felt light and brought me joy. And I sent this tweet out, which was like, what if I spend all of 2019 writing about Dolly Parton? And I wasn't thinking I was going to do it. I just thought, well, wouldn't that be nice? But the response I got from people were like, you should do it. And then I thought, I should do it. So I did. And then it ended up that I was going to write it in prose. And as I was telling her story, I sort of kept connecting it to my story because I was trying to understand why she's always been this beacon for me. And so that process sort of led to this. I didn't know what to call the book for so long. I call it like a book about Dolly Parton that's a bit of a memoir. And then I called it a memoir that's also a love song to Dolly Parton. Like, I don't know exactly what genre this book is, but I do call it memoir.
Right. And so you wanted to write something like not about those heavy traumatic ideas, and then you
then
did anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, can you maybe speak to this idea of like your voice, or like maybe certain preoccupations that you
Yeah, I mean, I think
write
I always tell my students, you're just going to write the same poem over and over again. It's inevitable. I mean, you can't get away from yourself, and I am preoccupied, obviously with some difficult personal history, but also just with the horrors of rape culture in general. And it's impossible to write about an iconic woman in the United States who has such, sort of an outsized femme look without delving into the problems of rape culture and objectification and all that. And so, it just, these things intersected with each other, this sort of like writing about Dolly and writing about my personal history, because to tell the story of, a woman in America, like my own experiences are going to come in.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about the book in a little bit in terms of how it's structured and certain details of it. But January, you also have a book on the horizon, but you also have a previous book, The Rewilding. And I was curious about if you could talk to us about both projects. Maybe first, Rewilding, and it's a really interesting title. And
Sure.
maybe you can talk to us about how that applies to the work.
Sure. So rewilding is an ecological term. It's funny because I just saw the TED Talk that kind of inspired me. And the talk itself was on putting wolves back into one of our national parks, Yellowstone, I think. And that idea of reintroducing something that's already been there and how it changes the landscape. And have been thinking about rewilding as a little bit like coming back stronger in the broken places.
Okay.
So I think about all sorts of ways that's happened in my life. I had a divorce, and sort of finding my way back from that period. And so I really love that book, and some of the poems in there. In 2019, I got a fellowship to stay at the University of Mississippi in Oxford, Mississippi, which is a sort of a glorious little oasis in the middle of a state that has a lot of issues. So it was great. I had to move my high schoolers down, so that wasn't all that much fun, but they adapted. But surprisingly, I mean, it gave me an opportunity to think about things that I hadn't thought about before. I mean, I'm from Virginia, so I'm from the South, but this was the deep South. And the South has its issues, and to try to understand slavery and the landscape and the Delta and the different regions. And I really learned a lot about Emmett Till, and I was going to read one of the Emmett Till poems that's in the book. So a lot of it is about a little bit of a rebirth of the new book. That's what my writing was about when I moved. We were there for 7 months, and then COVID hit. And so we were already isolated, so it was fine. But the new book is called Glitter Road. And so, talking about my time in Mississippi, and, I fell in love in Mississippi too. So it's not all sadness. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was noticing that obviously I haven't read Glitter Road because it hasn't come out yet, but I've read several poems that you've been publishing recently that seems to be focusing often on like Southern memorials and sculptures. And I think Amy Nezuka-Matoto teaches at University of Michigan.
Yes.
And she has a couple of interesting poems about that as well, being a person of color teaching in the South. Is it just something about that landscape that kind of inspired it? And
Yeah. I mean, it was the first time I had taken fellowship because, I've been a single mom for quite a long time. So it's not like I can pop up and go. So I was able to take my whole family down there, but I taught one class a semester, so I had an abundance of time. And the whole idea of this fellowship is time. It's the John Grisham Fellowship, and John Grisham funds it. So you get a house, you get some privacy, and you teach out of one grad students who, are just terrific. So I enjoyed that time. It really gave me some time to explore the landscape, to drive all over the state. And we still, I mean, it's such a big state and it only has 3 million people in there. So, I think Mississippi is not what you would expect. I mean, the people are wonderful, had terrific experience there, but it's also exactly like you would expect. I mean,
Right.
these monuments that have been down there forever, that reflect the Confederacy. The flag, when we were down there, that was still up for debate, the stars and bars. When we left, it finally came down. So they're dealing with their past in a way that other places aren't. And I found myself leaning more towards the environment and landscapes while I was down there too, but really feeling the trauma in the land. That was, it's still with me. It's still what a lot of my writing, even today, is about.
And we'll kind of touch on that later on in our conversation, thinking about how you both kind of infuse politics with the personal and the speaker. So, but maybe we can start with a reading from both you and use that as a launching off point to our Q&A. So Lynn, would you maybe want to start us off? We'll just kind of keep going back and forth and read a small portion from your latest book.
Sure. Yeah, so this is the book. It's got Dolly on the front. Each chapter is named after a song, and this is the Grass is Blue chapter. And I kind of cut it down a lot for time's sake. So occasionally there are time gaps in it, but hopefully it will hold together. I just want to give a trigger warning before I read for rape and for suicidal ideation. I want to mention that I do read a poem in the middle of it, and that poem is in my book Refusnik, which came out in February. And things you need to know about the chapter. Timothy is my husband, Ada and Stella are my daughters, and the fellowship I talk about was a fellowship at the New York Public Library. So hopefully this will all make sense, even though you're jumping in right in the middle. The Grass is Blue. The Grass is Blue appeared in 1999, just before bluegrass was to have a small moment in the larger pop culture. The vocals on the title track, a song in which the reality of heartbreak is so unbearable that the singer can carry on only by denying one truth after another, were recorded live. And Dolly's voice sings the pain so that we feel the impossible but necessary alternate universe where she and her lover are still together. The intricate harmonies of the backing vocals came later, performed by Alison Krauss and Dan Tominski, a guitarist, member of Krauss's band, and, notably, George Clooney's singing voice in the soon-to-be hit movie and best-selling soundtrack for Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Almost every band member on The Grass is Blue was at the time of the recording already an accomplished solo artist in the bluegrass world. Sam Bush on mandolin, Stuart Duncan on fiddle, Jim Mills on banjo, Jerry Douglas on dobro. Dolly referred to this assemblage as God's Bluegrass Band. The music hit a chord in me that just rang real spiritual and real true, she said of their work together. Dolly won Best Female Country Vocal Performance at the 2000 Grammys, and The Grass is Blue won Best Bluegrass Album. To her utter surprise and delight, it also won Album of the Year at the 2000 International Bluegrass Music Awards. It worked to go home again. In the early 80s in Los Angeles, and feeling very far from her Tennessee home, separated from a man with whom she'd at least had an emotional affair, suffering from increasingly difficult gynecological problems, unhappy with her body size, and forced to cancel her tour because of telephone death threats from unstable fans, Dolly, deeply depressed, feeling overexposed, contemplated suicide. Check in on your friend who seems so okay. Check in on your friend who can perform for thousands with an ebullient smile on her face, cracking folksy jokes while hiding the darkest thoughts. In a 1986 interview with Ladies' Home Journal, Dolly remembers, I was just sitting upstairs in my bedroom one afternoon when I noticed in the nightstand drawer my gun that I keep for burglars. I looked at it a long time, wondering and saying to myself, well now, this is where people get the idea of suicide, isn't it? Guns around the house, and people sorrowing and all. Dolly felt her low moment to be a humbling before God. a reset on her attitude and drive. In her 2007 song Better Get to Living, Dolly advises, all healing has to start with you, so we'd better stop whining. Part of me bristles at the whole buck up attitude toward mental health. It can be dangerously isolating. Some people never escape depression, and it's not because they're not trying hard enough. In the late 90s, I was so depressed I could barely leave my apartment except to go to work. I couldn't pick anything up off the floor of my studio. I watched numbly as two mice feasted on an open box of Entenmann's glazed donuts in the middle of the room. I'd finally gotten my life where I wanted it, where it seemed normal. And it was then that I plunged, forced to come to terms with all the trauma that had come before. In 2018, sitting on the floor of my library office, a poem poured out of me, a poem that, like the musicians working on The Grass is Blue, brought me to tears while I created it. I wrote it in January, before we were able to address my daughter Ada's ADHD and in the midst of her deep suffering. I'd never written a poem in the eye of a crisis before. Most of my prior book was about trauma from decades earlier, written in hindsight. I had thought time and distance were crucial, but this poem arrived as the feelings were as fresh as any feelings I'd ever had. The new poem was called 12, and I wrote it the morning after I had skipped the yearly New York Public Library Gala, an opportunity to dress up fancy, which I quite enjoy, and instead stayed home with Ada and Stella to do their laundry and know that Ada was home and that I was there if she needed me for anything at all. Timothy was out of town. I didn't realize at the time that Ada's inability to even sort her laundry was a sign of her crumbling. I sat against the cabinets in my workspace, my coffee reliably to my right, and I wrote everything I remembered about being 12. I wrote about a basement reception at my parents' shul where an old man pinched my cheeks because I was so adorable. I wrote about sneaking into a bar the next weekend with friends to buy them cigarettes from the vending machines where an older man walked by and pinched my ass. It's a weird, weird age, suspended between persona. I wrote about wanting to save Ada from everything I had learned the hard way. I'm not sure why I thought that was possible. I forgot about what patriarchy does to girls. I thought it would be simple since she hadn't suffered the trauma I'd suffered. Absence of X equals avoidance of Y, I thought in my faulty math. I sat on the floor typing through big tears falling in front of me. When my fellow Melinda came in to do one of our daily morning check-ins, I was still crying. 12. When I was your age, I went to a banquet. When I was your age, I went to a bar room and bought cigarettes with quarters lifted from the laundry money. Last night, I did all your laundry. I don't know why I thought this love could be pure. It's enough that it's infinite. I kiss your cheek when you sleep and wonder if you feel it. It's the same cheek I've kissed from the beginning. You don't have to like me. You just have to let me. Keep your body yours. It's mine. When I was your age, I went to a banquet and a man in a tux pinched my cheeks. When I was your age, I went to a bar room and a man in a band shirt pinched my ass. There is so much I don't know about you. Last night, I skipped a banquet so I could stay home and do your laundry and drink wine from my grandmother's glass. When I was your age, boys traded quarters for a claw and my carcass on a pleather bench while I missed the first few seconds of a song I'd hoped to record on my backseat boombox. When I was your age, I enjoyed a hook. You think I know nothing of metamorphosis, but when I was your age, I invented a key change. You don't have to know what I know. I've put 12 in my most recent book of poems, and I dedicated it to Ada. It is maybe the most honest and complicated love poem I've written. I taught Carmen Jimenez Smith's poem Daughter last week in my feminist poetry class at Columbia University. Sometimes she's a stranger in my home because I hadn't imagined her. Who will her daughter be? One of my 20-something students said they found it offensive, a mother not being able to see her daughter as an autonomous being with agency. I hear you, I said, kind of wrote because I felt a bit sheepish about how much I related to Smith's lines. I've been 12, but I've also been the parent of 12. How did I dare to imagine my kids could grow up without struggle? I worry all the time that I failed, that my anger and frustration and PTSD clouded my ability to save Ada from what maybe would not have been inevitable. The Grass is Blue is about the end of a love affair, and 12 is too in its way. In a performance of The Grass is Blue at Nashville's Ryman Auditorium in 2015, Dolly introduces the song. I think almost everybody has had a broken heart, and if you ain't, you're gonna have one. We all think when we have our first broken heart that it's just gonna kill us. Well, a broken heart won't kill you, but it can make you wanna die. To avoid these dire feelings, the song's narrator refuses to acknowledge or perhaps cannot even see reality, and so her pain is lessened by this refusal. Obviously, this is a fallacy, this myth of blissful insanity, perhaps representing the magical thinking of grief, the mental smokescreen and human defenses of living post-trauma. I've had to think up a way to survive, since you said it's over, told me goodbye. This is what words can do. Dolly doesn't write, I've had to think of a way to survive. That of would imply that ways to survive trauma exist. Up implies survival methods will need to be invented from whole cloth, that survival is a creative act. After I was raped as a child, it took me quite a while to tell anyone. I come from a secret-keeping family even before I had big secrets of my own to keep, so it was almost like I knew on some biological level to keep the pain to myself. Scholars of intergenerational trauma tell us, writes Rabbi Tirzah Firestone in her book Wounds into Wisdom, that the silence shrouding a family's untold stories paradoxically becomes the strongest form of transmission. I put my bloody underwear in my book bag and threw it away at school the next day, in the trash bin on the far side of the playground, past the slide and the baseball diamond and the handball court, the piercing sun of California probably pinning into me because it was always there doing that. I don't think I knew the words for what had happened. I didn't even know what sex was, really. I was in the 4th grade. Some survival ideas I came up with. Obsessive concern with the feelings and needs of others at the expense of my own. Crying all night into my pillow. I am going to turn around, and when I turn back around, I am be a whole new person. Alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, promiscuity, Dolly Parton, abusive men, poetry, 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 New York City, Zoloft, image rehearsal therapy, candy, friendships, high heels, poetry, Xanax, feminist activism, Timothy, Ada, Stella. After her near-suicidal breakdown, Dolly hopped in a camper, no wig, no makeup, with her best friend from childhood, Judy Ogle. For weeks on end, Ladies' Home Journal tells us, she swam, soaked, strummed a guitar, wrote songs, and read everything from self-help to poetry. She made it through. Poet Wallace Stevens said, "It is a violence from within that protects us from a violence without. It is the imagination pressing back against the pressure of reality," which is another way to say, I've had to think up a way to survive.
So thank you so much, Lynn. Maybe I can just do a quick follow-up before we get to January's reading. We'll talk more about parenthood for both you guys in a moment, but I was curious about your just initial how you confronted this idea. Usually memoir, it's like follows like a linear chronology, or it's nonfiction is kind of criticism of music, and you kind of go out of order, you follow playlists, you find these interesting kind of conduits into your own life. I was just curious about how your like own personal process was moving into prose and how you approached the memoir.
It was I know I tend to be an extremely organized person. So from as soon as I knew I was writing this for real, I had decided I was going to write each chapter based on a song, and so that would make the story a little bit out of order of my own personal life, and the songs aren't listed chronologically to when she recorded them either. It's more of a story arc through kind of like a journey through rape culture almost in America is the arc behind it. And so some of the stuff is out of order. But as I wrote each chapter, my thought process was a third of it will be about Dolly Parton, the sort of cultural phenomenon. And then a third will be about Dolly Parton as the musician and songwriter. And then a third would be about my own personal history. So when I wrote each chapter, at least in the first draft, they were pretty even. And then, in revision, I let the manuscript take over and I stopped imposing my will on it so much.
Yeah, did you find it did you find it difficult going back through those moments in memoir? And I guess maybe the bigger question is like, what do you what do you think memoir should do? I mean,
Mm.
that's a big question, but it's like, how do you like what should a memoir try to not avoid? What should it be confronting? So it's not just a autobiography.
Right, right. Well, I mean, I think of autobiography as like the story of an entire life, right? So it's like I was born in Indiana in 1973, and then it would just like go right up until right now. Whereas memoir is sort of using the stories from your life to tell one particular story. So it's I'm not giving you all the details of my life. I'm giving you the details that come into this particular story arc, I guess is how I would say that. In terms of writing difficult subject matter, that was one very nice thing about writing about Dolly Parton at the same time, because if the writing got too burdensome, I literally had to listen to Dolly Parton's music. It was like part of my job at that point. And it was just such a joy to write about her. It sort of softened the other stuff. I've also, I had published 3 books then before this one came out of poetry, which deal with a lot of those subjects. And so I was sort of used to um, thinking about them. This was a little different because I couldn't just look away when I got overwhelmed because I was telling it was memoir. I couldn't just go off on some flight of fancy. Um, so that was a little difficult to write and to publish. It's a very different experience, but I had some precedent for it in my career.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes a memoir I think risks of like saying like here's all the good things about my life, but I like how you often like confront yourself. Like I love that passage you just read where your student says this is really offensive, and you're like, yeah, you're right, and then you're like, I do it all the time, and I
Yeah,
love that.
right. Because she was right, you know,
Yeah,
like I could see that she was right. But at that very moment, I happened to be struggling, with my pre-adolescent daughter. And so I was like, I don't care if it's right. Like, I want all the control here, please. It's just, it's something you don't think about until you've got that 12-year-old daughter.
yeah. Um, January, would you like to read some from your current work?
Sure.
Awesome.
And Lynn, that was a terrific reading, so thank you. Sure, I'm going to bounce around a little bit. I'm going to read a few poems from my second book, Misery Island, and then I'll head right into Rewilding, and then I'll slide out with 2 new ones. So, in the company of women, make me laugh over coffee. Make it a double. Make it frothy so it seethes in our delight. Make my cup overflow with your small happiness. I want to hoot and snort and cackle and chuckle. Let your laughter fill me like a bell. Let me listen to your ringing and singing as Billie Holiday croons above our heads. Sorry, the blues are nowhere to be found. Not tonight, not here. No makeup, no tears. Only contours, only curves. Each sip takes back a pound. Each dry roasted swirl takes our soul. Can I have a refill? Just one more? Let the bitterness sink to the bottom of our lives. Let us take this joy to go. That poem, the night before I had the big conversation with my then husband about the marriage, my friend took me out for coffee at Starbucks, and she did what girlfriends do. She didn't have an answer, but she said it'll be okay. And so, yeah, and it was, and eventually, but that's what friends are for. How to love. After stepping into the world again, there is that question of how to love, how to bundle yourself against the frosted morning, the crunch of icy grass underfoot, the scrape of cold wipers along the windshield, and convert time into distance. What song to sing down an empty road as you begin your morning commute? And is there enough in you to see, really see, the 3 wild turkeys crossing the street with their featherless heads and stilt-like legs in search for a morning meal? Nothing to do but hunker down, wait for them to safely cross. As they amble away, you wonder if they want to be startled back into this world. Maybe you do too, waiting for all this to give way to love itself, to look into the eyes of another and feel something. The pleasure of a new lover in the unbroken night, your wings folded around him on the other side of this ragged January, as if a long sleep has ended. I have to apologize. I have a little bit of a scratchy throat, so I can hear it. Gives me that sexy low tone voice. So in thinking about Lynn talking about her daughter, I was thinking about my two children. They're now, one's in college and the other one's about to go. But back in the day, being a single mom, can't really get out and do things. And I really loved dancing. So the closest thing we could do really was roller skating. And so this is my ode in a way to the Roller Palace, which is no more, but it definitely served a purpose for us. Night at the Roller Palace. After the birthday crowds thin out, after the hokey pokey and chicken dance, after the parents have towed their shaky kids like cabooses ready to decouple, and the pint-sized skaters have circled the rink like a gang of meerkats spun into a 10-car pileup, you turn sideways and angle by as another one bites the dust, thumps overhead. You give a finger point to the DJ stand because in your mind, we are soldiers in the march against time, grooving to the retro beat while the disco ball shines overhead, cut crystal against rainbow walls. You glide like Mercury or Apollo Ono without wings or skin suit, in lowrider jeans that hug your body like you hug corners, past them all on the smoothed out parquet floor, worn down by time and rhythm. The trick is to make it look effortless. Remind them that your quickness is a kind of love. You are the spark between wood and wheel. And when your cranky kids hang out by the wall, ready to go, holding their 8 wheels by their brown leather tongues, you give them a wave and keep circling. Just one more song, you say. This is your me time. It's all skate. You've got your whole self in. That's what it's all about. Excuse me. I missed that place. So my kids are biracial. And so my son, actually I'm teasing him because he kind of looks like the captain of the USA soccer team, who is really cute. But I wrote this poem for him in thinking about, that journey, and also thinking about Trayvon Martin and all the boys who seem to, all the Black boys who seem to be, I don't know, killed at the hands of police. Hoodie. A gray hoodie will not protect my son from rain, from the New England cold. I see the partial eclipse of his face as his head sinks into the half dark and shades his eyes. Even in our quiet suburb, with its unlocked doors, I fear for his safety. The darkest child on our street in the empire of blocks. Sometimes I do not know who he is anymore, traveling the back roads between boy and man. He strides a deep stride, pounds a basketball into wet pavement. Will he take his shot, or is he waiting for the open mouth orange rim to take a chance on him? I sing his name to the night, ask for safe passage from this borrowed body into the next, and wonder who could mistake him for anything but good. So I used to get this comparison a lot, and I live in New England, so there aren't a ton of Black people here. But occasionally people would tell me I look like our former First Lady, Michelle Obama. I'm being told I look like FLOTUS, New Year's Eve party 2014. Deep in my biceps, I know it's a compliment. just as I know this is an all Black people look-alike moment. So I use the minimal amount of muscles to crack a smile. All night, he catches sight of me or someone like me, standing next to the deconstructed cannoli and empty bottles of Prosecco. And in that moment, I understand how little right any of us have to be whoever we are, the constant tension of making our way in this world on hope and change. You're working your muscles to the point of failure, Michelle Obama once said about her workout regimen. But she knows we wear our history in our darkness, in our patience. A compliment is a compliment, this I know, just as the clock will always strike midnight and history repeats. This is how I can wake up the next morning and love the world again. And so I think I will end on two new poems from my manuscript that'll be out in 2024. When we went down to Mississippi, before we went down, so this is like, we were there in August 2019. Earlier in the year, the Emmett Till Memorial Marker, which was at the water, where he was pulled out of the water, was shot up. And there was this picture that went viral of these three Ole Miss students standing next to the marker. And for those who don't know, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy who was shot back in 1955, I think, 55 or 57. He was, for allegedly whistling at a white woman. He was shot, he was beaten, he was taken from his, where he was staying with relatives and thrown into the Tallahatchie River. And his mother, when she retrieved the body, had an open casket funeral to show the world what had happened to her son and the things that happened to Black people. And if it, I guess it's the closest thing, you know, to a viral moment, that's exactly what that moment did. And so we were going down to Mississippi when this had happened. So it certainly gave us pause, but I was able to go to the memorial ceremony with my daughter when they put the sign back up. But I wanted to read this poem that talks about that moment. And the title comes from a USA Today article. 3 Ole Miss students used guns to vandalize a memorial to lynching victim Emmett Till. They pose their bodies as if they've just bagged their first 10-point buck. One holds a shotgun, another squats below the shot up sign, a third stands with an AR-15. 3 faces smiling, hoisting guns in front of a bullet-ridden marker. This is the site where Till's body was removed from the river. It is hunter's hours. The sign's jagged holes could slice a finger. Those students are someone's sons or brothers, not much older than the young Black boy, his body beaten, tethered to a 75-pound cotton gin fan and thrown into the Tallahatchie. This is an old story, a Southern Gothic. To deny this boy's life and then deny the marker that says he lived breaks me every time. The camera captures the night's dark cover, the tall grasses, the momentary flash illuminating their shit-eating grins, and the sun and the gun barrels glint. Lifetimes of getting away with it. And so the one thing that we didn't get to do when we were in Mississippi was go down the Mississippi River, which they do tours of. And I mean, the Mississippi is huge and, you know, it runs through the center of the country practically. But we went back in 2021 and we were able to do that canoe rides. We certainly didn't go the whole expanse. We just did a little bit in Mississippi, but it was an amazing experience. The river remembers. Here, the water is silt brown, stretches mile wide, flat as a washed out conveyor belt, an unhemmed rumble strip. I can't read the river, can't see my hand when it plunges elbow deep to feel the cool against the Mississippi heat, hot as a dog's mouth. Here we canoe for hours through swirling eddies, watch the trash barges and towboats travel downstream. The river glistens hard as broken glass. Here, everything is fluid. In lower Mississippi, the South, where the 2-lane blacktop cuts through an infinity of flat, cotton, soybean, corn, farm, tumble-down shack. Creeks and rivers bifurcate the land like blood veins. Here, the GPS gives up. New islands form at the current's whim, and what is untouched grows lush and verdant. Willow and privet border the collapsing coastline. A carp leaps into our boat when it hears us coming. We stop here in an oxbow. Gumbo mud sticks to our feet. River rock, plastic, fossils, gar. Raccoon and coyote leave tracks in the rust-colored sand. The slaves, sold down the river, hid here, waited for their chance to escape up north, hid in caves, fled to the Twin Cities and Canada, their fate at the mercy of the river's next rise. Here's the nadir of our suffering, which started in one place to end in another. Here's where flow and marvel and history converge, this harm joy, this beautiful sadness. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A small follow-up for you, January, and Lynn, you could probably also answer this in a moment. My students often want to write poetry about big cultural issues, and they want to write something significant in cultural trauma and politics. And sometimes maybe they take on more than they can. They take on too much at once. And I was curious about how you kind of what's your angle on how you confront those political issues, January?
You know, I think it all depends on the issues and all depends on where I am in life. I couldn't write either of those Mississippi poems if I had never been to Mississippi, or at least I would try, and they would probably fail at some point. And the poems about my son, and I've written some about my daughter as well. I mean, sometimes it's finding the small moments and being able, and it was really, pretty straightforward poet. So I write what I see, for Hoodie. I mean, he literally was walking down the street and I'm like, ugh, on a gray day in New England. And you never know what can happen on the next block or two. And then, so starting small and maybe not giving up. And, you can write about a subject from any angle at any point in your life. So if the first one doesn't work out, it just means that you're getting closer to the poem that you're supposed to write. So I would keep at it. And I would start small with a moment. I know sometimes students don't, at least my students don't like to write personally. They find it difficult. And, you can have some success, certainly by writing very abstractly, but I want to connect. So, think about, the poets you like reading and then, try to mirror what they do. But, in your own writing, it's just, you keep at it and you try to clarify the moment. Yeah. It's how do you talk about things that, have been going on forever? What's your perspective? How are you going to add to this moment? Because I think all voices, all opinions are important.
Yeah. Lynn, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this. And I guess also thinking about your memoir, I mean, there's nothing more personal than that. And do you ever have issues, ethical issues about like, what do I bring up and what shouldn't I bring up? And, how do you handle those kind of big questions?
That's a good question. First, I want to say, January, that reading was so beautiful. I still have tears in my eyes from that.
Thank you.
The way that you write joy amid the pain is extraordinary and enviable. I think, well, to answer the question about like how to write political poems I think The week that I gave my undergrads political poems this semester, I think I got the most groans. Everyone was like, "No," um, and I quickly realized it was because they felt like to write a political poem was to sort of be really preachy and to sort of make it like state your point of view, and so that was my own error, not recognizing that what they needed was a guide that you write your own experience with an issue that is made political. Most of the students in my class, their very existence has been made political at some point. So I think it's finding your personal connection to what is political. As far as like writing, I mean, I assume you're asking like including other people in a memoir, right?
Yeah.
I have changed some names of people or obscured details about them in some cases. Um, you know, I think. As far as writing most of the characters, I think except for a couple, I showed it to them
Mm.
first. And I said, and especially my children, and especially my older daughter, because my younger daughter was so young when I wrote the book that she didn't really, there's nothing of consequence that she could get upset about. But my older one was going through some shit. So, I showed it to her. I said, you can take out whatever you want. I do think that Gen Z happens to be braver than the whole lot of us. But I also had a big stop the presses moment at the very end when I wanted to take out even more about my daughter from the book, and they actually did delay the book by a week because of my moment. But so I mean, it's hard to know when you write about other people, how that's going to land. One thing I learned writing the book was not that I didn't have it before, but I increased my ability for compassion. And I just felt so much compassion for people who had even done me wrong. I felt like, how can I write about them in a way that is compassionate and humanizes them so that their flaws are really more believable because we're all flawed? And that was sort of a long winded answer. I don't know if it got to your question.
No, absolutely. I mean, I was thinking about both of you guys write about parenthood, motherhood. In fact, I believe both of you got published in an anthology about motherhood this spring. And I was just kind of, maybe you can start with you, Lynn, then move to January. I was like, I was really found the parts about your daughter compelling just because I'm a daughter of a 13-year-old, I mean, a father of a 13-year-old daughter. So maybe there's a little bit of bias there, but one of my moments that I thought was really intriguing in your memoir, Lynn, was when you were writing about Jolene, probably the most famous Dolly Parton song, and you were thinking about your daughter and how people look at your daughter, and that's a really brave thing to confront in a memoir. And I was curious about how your daughter felt about that part.
Yeah, I mean, she has been street harassed since she was about 11 or 12 in New York City. And so the issue of street harassment and being objectified by teachers and by the dress code and by other students, it's just has been a constant in her life since she was, since she hit puberty, really. And so she's been mad about it since then. And I think she felt, she was fine with that part being in there, being misunderstood, being labeled. As recently as last year, an English teacher in a parent-teacher conference told my husband that, like, what's interesting about her is that she looks like she, puts together a nice outfit in the morning, and meanwhile she's getting an A in the class. And so I think like it's that kind of thing, and in thinking of Jolene, to tie it into that, it was like, one of the things is that all of this stuff is being put on Jolene. We never hear from Jolene herself. She maybe doesn't even know who this guy is.
Right.
Like it's about her, but it doesn't include her. And so I think that happens to women a lot. So much is projected on and girls too.
I mean, I was thinking about your idea about compassion, even for those who are, the victimizer. And you have a lot of compassion for Jolene, even though she's kind of like villainized in that song.
I do, because I also don't know that she's up to anything.
Yeah.
We just don't know. The speaker is the one sort of like guessing that Jolene's gone after, but we have no proof of this, right? Like, so I think a lot of times a lot is put onto women, especially women who look a certain way, that we're sort of like predatory or something, and that could be what happened with Jolene. We just don't know.
Yeah, and it also reminds me a little bit of what you just said about Gen Z and how parts of your book where you were fell victim to that as well. You were just kind of like, well, whatever, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. Whereas Gen Z does not,
That's right.
they're very aware and they don't.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, growing up, I thought like you're okay, you're like 11, 12 now, your body is up for public discussion and I guess men do this stuff to you, on the street. And whereas, the younger generation, because they have access to so much more information, they're like, wait, no, this is my body, and not that it doesn't still happen, but they're at least they don't feel like they deserved it or it's just what happens to girls.
And thinking about your role in parenthood and motherhood, January Hoodie is one of my favorite poems, and we
Mhm.
said this through email. I show it usually the day one of my poetry class, and students
Yeah.
just really gravitate towards all the things that are working in it. Maybe you can talk a little bit about, you have already, I guess, but like thinking about how parenthood and motherhood has played a role in your work, not just in terms of the product, but maybe actually the process
Yeah.
challenges.
Yeah, I have a poem at the end of Misery Islands called What My Kids Will Say About Me in Their Tell-All Book. And what I usually say is, when it's their turn, they can tell, their side of the story. I always look at poems as snapshots. And so I'm capturing a moment, but it's not the entire moment. It's not the before and the after, it's just this moment. And so, with my kids, like Lynn, I've gone the I hope I don't publish anything that's embarrassing or, people say, how can you write about such subjects? Well, I hope that I don't publish anything that's embarrassing for the kids. I have checked with them. I mean, before they were younger. Now it matters a little bit more, but I mean, they don't read my work, so I don't have to worry about them right now. Um, but parenthood has been my other great job, it's, writing poetry and supporting a poetry community, which involves teaching and also supporting these kids on their journey. So it's integral, and I can't I couldn't imagine not doing either. So they work together, and it's made things in my life a lot easier. Like, poetry is my center, my children are part of that center, all the decisions come from that. I often say to my students that, whatever is their center, which may not be writing or poetry, whether it's basketball or music or baking or knitting or whatever it is they get up in the morning for, that's the part they have to protect. And so, it's interesting to see my kids now on their path too, now that they're a little older. So my son is up at Syracuse for his freshman year. And so Hoodie resonates with me even more because he was 13 when I wrote that, and now he's 19. So that's the journey between boy and man. And my daughter is about to go off. She's looking at art school. So, being 17, and, she made me the milkshake while all of this was going on. So, yeah, I mean, they've added so much to my life and, to my creative life. So,
Absolutely. This is kind of connected, I suppose, but a student question that we were having is, and this is like the age-old debate, so maybe you guys, I would love to hear your thoughts on it, is I guess about revision.
mhm.
And we're thinking about, how do you know, this is a big question, but like, how do you know when a piece is finished? Whether it just be like, I hit that last line and I know that's it, or in terms of like drafts, like what do you look for in a
Mhm.
poem or in a prose piece that you know that this is ready to be seen?
Mm.
January, you want to have some thoughts on that?
Sure. Sure. I mean, I don't like revision. I mean, it is a necessary evil. I mean, some people really do. They'll say that's the part they like. But I'm no fool. I know, if I'm writing something and I've done, and I think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, I come back to it in a day or two, and I'm like, oh, no one should see this. So revision is necessary. I do feel that it's a internal, emotional, in the body feeling when you know a poem is ready. But you also know when a poem's not ready. And there is no reason to put something out in the world that's not ready. So, I may, I tried it when I sit down and write a poem, I try to get as close to a draft as possible. but I've been known to sort of chip away and come back at a poem every day after until I've got something that's workable. I'll put my poems away for a few days and come back.
Yeah.
I have a core group of friends that I work with who know my work and will tell it to me straight.
Mm.
And I send it out in the world when I think it's ready. And you know, if it comes back a few times and no one takes it, then I take another look at it. You know, but I'll still get it out there. I'll still try. You know,
Right.
so it's just a process, and you know, rejection is part of that process. But I know poets who, so a good example. So I was a judge for the National Book Award, and they had their big ceremony a few weeks ago. And Sharon Olds, who was a poet and one of the nominees, you can find this video online, where at the National Book Award reading, which was the night before, she held up her book with all the edits in it. And she's like, I'm not afraid. I'm going to read this, poem that I have worked on. So even after it is in print, she is still making edits.
Wow.
So who knows when a poem is done? I mean, and your view of that poem can change. With your poem, you can edit it, work on it as long as you want to.
So, I mean, I think that sometimes, just as a teacher, sometimes that necessary evil thing is a hard thing to.
Yeah.
A lot of students who are like, "This is my expression. Don't touch it." It's
right.
Like, there's no one way to do it, and it's like, I agree, but
you should consider. Yes.
How you balance that is a hard thing to.
Yeah. Trying to convince them that, you need to, it's worth it to try to make every line count. And I often tell my students, when you get to the end of the poem and you're sort of like, there's that so what factor, you ask yourself, what is the poem risking? What's at risk here? So, sometimes it's just pure description and, okay. But like, there should be some sort of transition, even if it's a slight one in the poem. So some sort of a change. And if there's not that change, then maybe you should look at it again.
Yeah, I like that risking idea.
Yeah.
Lynn, how do you approach these ideas?
In much the same way that January does, except that I actually love revision. But I have that moment where I'm like, this is like the hottest poem ever. And then 2 days later, I'm like, this is the worst poem ever. It's a whole journey. But I love revision. I love taking something that's almost there and just like tinkering away at it until it's just pristine and I don't know, I find that to be very exhilarating, and I love that as a teacher. I love watching students turn in revisions. I always require that because January, my students, they don't want to do it, and so it's required now because otherwise they weren't doing it. And and I understand that, like, you've written this thing and like it's art, it should be untouchable. I mean, not to make everything about Dolly Parton, but there are some songs in her catalog that she's recorded 3 times in 3 different versions and releases on different albums. It's like she's also doing that thing that Sharon Olds was doing, where she's like going back to what she's written and just tinkering with it a little bit. I mean, I think that's just the joy of it. Some poems arrive almost fully formed, and some poems will make you bananas and take months to get right. It's just, I don't know. It's just wild.
Right. It's just a follow-up, like, what was the transformation like going from poetry to prose?
In terms of revision?
In terms of revision or process, or just the entire experience with it? Reading, or
it's like a lot of sentences. There are just so many more words.
So many words.
And so that was, there are some different rules, but I did figure out how to bring in. I think my experience in poetry helped me balance all the different things, because in poetry we get to take all these leaps. And so that was definitely a huge help to me. And as far as revision goes, I read, as I always do with poetry, I read everything out loud, but the book is like 90,000 words. So I lost my voice a couple times reading the book out loud to myself, but I needed it, even though it's prose, I needed it to have a rhythm to it that I could only hear. So I had to read it out loud.
Yeah, it's a lot of poetry and prose and vice versa.
Makes perfect sense.
Maybe one more question before you guys, and this is a kind of a small one, but a big one, is what is a writer or a poet that you have read that maybe taught you the most? It doesn't even have to be your favorite writer or poet, but the one that taught you the most about writing or poetry? That was like a published writer that was your best teacher as well, I guess. Lynn, do you have?
Sure. I mean, of course, anytime anyone asks a question like this, you then forget any poet you've ever heard of. It's like,
Prepared you.
poet? I've never read poetry. The two come to mind immediately, and they may not be the biggest, but they're the ones that come to mind. And they are Diane Wilkowski and Allen Ginsberg, who I found very early in my career as a poet, and they just sort of gave me permission to be expansive. And in Diane Wilkowski's case, gave me permission to be angry in poetry as a woman, and that to me was invaluable.
Great answer. January?
Well, I will say Sharon Olds and Toy Derricott. Toy was my first teacher, and she is co-founder of Cave Canem. And so she opened me up to Allen Ginsberg and played Hal on a little, as an undergrad back in the day, I played on a cassette recorder and mimeographed copies of Howl and sitting and listening to that. But she also introduced me to Sharon, which gave me permission to talk about the body in ways that, I didn't think were permissible. So both of those teachers are formative for me. I'll mention two more quickly.
Yeah.
I was recently rereading Elizabeth Bishop, who is a bit of a technician, and reminds me, I was rereading like The Moose, thinking, boy, if she were in my workshop today, I'd probably wrongfully say, you need to cut this. Can you get to the moose? But I read her for that reason, because she meanders and lingers and is, her descriptions are wonderful. And recently, Diane Seuss's book of her American sonnets. I'm blanking on the name
Frank,
of it.
right?
Frank, yeah, that book was a little revolutionary. It reminds me that I can keep learning as a writer, how to do things differently. So
awesome. Well, that's a great note to end on, I think. Thank you so much, guys, for spending the hour with us. It was really enlightening. And I was looking at our Q&A and I was like, oh, we got some questions, and they were just compliments. So, wow. So I think everybody enjoyed the experience as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely appreciate it. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.